Hot chocolate. I guess it's in the name, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Hello and welcome. Tuesday. This is Pastor Lane Nelson alongside
Pastor Joel. Hi.
and we are here at Eastside Lutheran Church in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, on our regular Tuesday evening versions of this little cable access show we call Together in Faith. It is cold, cold, cold on this night. It is again not a nice Tuesday like we had such a long streak of. The wind is howling, and we had a burial today, and I think the cemetery is the coldest place on the face of the earth. But we are indoors tonight. It is warm. The space heater is going, and we are with you, and that warms our hearts.
Yeah.
So if you are out there, say a hello. Let us know you are with us, even if you are watching this a little bit later than live on Tuesday night. We are completely humbled and thrilled that you are with us here.
There it is.
Yeah. I do have another announcement or / advertisement, and that's something I've shared with you before, but I think it's worth advertising again. And that's simply we are doing a Saturday evening worship service at 5:30. It was new in the fall, and we have had some wonderful response. And over again, the people who have attended that service just seem to really like it. Sometimes they come back for seconds on Sunday morning, but not the expectation. But there's just something about going to worship in the evening after your to-do list is done for the day,
Right.
where you're maybe just a little more receptive to the workings of the Holy Spirit in your life, a chance to be a little bit more contemplative even, and to kind of close your afternoon in prayer is powerful. At least that's what I've been finding.
Yeah, well, we have some people saying hi. Colleen, good evening. And
Hello.
Deborah Gunn and Jackie Swiden, hi.
Hello. Hello to my sister-in-law, Connie Jackson, in the warm city of Houston, Texas.
Oh.
Hello to Nyla.
Hey, Nyla.
And to Dick.
Hey, Dick.
And to Carol. And to Randy.
Man.
And to Dick again. And to Miss Gail down in Louisiana. Yes, it is warm there as well. And humid, I'm going to guess, maybe even in February. That's right, today's February 1st.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is Groundhog's Day, so I'm sure you are all on the edge of your seat waiting to see if there will be a shadow of the groundhog.
Punxsutawney Phil.
And whether or not we can expect more winter, or if we can wrap this up with a bow and move right into spring the day after.
Dixie also says hi. Dixie Buffington. What a great name. Oh. Oh, and Dorothy. Good to hear from you all.
I just noticed the little picture there for Miss Gail, then I popped up on the screen. She's with Bobby, I'm thinking. It's pretty small, so a shout out there also. Yeah. Well, we are not only here to give you the weather forecast, but to talk about important matters of faith. And as you are aware, we have been in this series called Origin Stories, or at least that's what we're calling it. Sure. Pastor Joel meets with a group on Tuesday mornings at 9 o'clock in the little building we refer to as the barn here. Yeah. So if you would like to have a more in-depth discussion on these topics, you can certainly join him 9 o'clock Tuesday mornings. The conversation lasts for about 45 minutes. Yeah. Then it transitions into a nice fellowship time with coffee and snacks and the folks at St. Arbuck's. So
yeah, it's been a great conversation. We've had consistently 12 to 14 folks coming down and just really, really lovely conversations. And that is actually how I think we're supposed to read our scriptures, in a group conversation. And so we attempt to do that here on the screen, but for those of you in the Sioux Falls area, it's even more lively and lovely when we can get together in person. And so, yeah, that happens on Tuesday mornings for these Origin Story conversations. And we're going to be doing these conversations up to Lent. And so we have tonight, and then we have 3 more Tuesdays in this Origin Story. And we've been sticking to Origin Stories in Genesis, but we're going to be pushing out of Genesis into the book of Exodus.
We will
next
be
week.
exodusing
That's right. Yeah.
Genesis into Exodus.
Yeah. Right. Good. Yeah.
Just came up with that now. Thank you.
So if that's of interest to you, I hope we'll glad to see you online and glad to see you, Kay Damer, here tonight, and but also on Tuesday mornings at 9 a.m. Wow, good. What do you say? Should we?
We should probably jump in. A quick
Yeah.
recap. We talked about creation so far. We have talked about who else?
Abraham.
Abraham.
We talked about Father Abraham, who had many sons.
Many sons.
Many sons had Father Abraham, so the story goes. And then we talked about Jacob, the conniving Jacob, and tonight we're getting into Joseph, and I just thought maybe one of the most beautifully told stories in certainly in the book of Genesis to me.
And when we started looking at this, I was surprised. I hadn't put it in relation before, but the story of Joseph takes up a huge chunk of the books of Genesis. Genesis is a big book anyway, 50 chapters.
Right.
But this story of Joseph starts in what, 35, 37?
37, yeah.
Chapter 37, and his story runs all the way up to the end of the book in chapter 50.
Yeah, and it's it's just a beautifully told story. So if you are interested, because it has a really kind of almost theatrical progression, almost like you can read it in scenes as a play, and it's powerful. I mean, all these crazy things happen to Joseph, and he is this dreamer who is constantly has great trust in the dreams that God gives him, and also trusts in the interpretations, this gift of dream interpretation that he has, that then puts him in all kinds of interesting situations. He is just immensely interesting. We've been in our Tuesday discussions, we've been utilizing this this book from Walter Brueggemann. Let's see, there, go like this.
Oh, wrong way.
And this Walter Brueggemann text interpretation, and thanks again to Kermit Rye, who's his name is in the inside of this book because it was given to me from his library. So thank you, Kermit, for that. And one of the interesting things that Walter Brueggemann does in this Genesis book is he starts off each section with a New Testament reference. And I think that's a lovely way for us as Lutheran Christians to frame our reading of Genesis, to reference into. And so I think I want to start with that text that he starts with, which is Romans. And so if we kind of think about this Joseph story through the Romans 8 text, this is Romans 8, 28 through 30.
And before you start reading, a quick good evening also back to Irene. Nice to have you here, Irene. And also to Donna. Welcome and glad to have you as a part of the conversation tonight as we're focusing on Joseph.
Now, if this is the Donna that Donna Moldenhauer, who I might know from my home congregation back in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Good to see you tonight. So, Romans 8.
Is that her?
I cannot tell.
We need magnifying glass to see that. Sorry.
But good to have you here.
Oh, and Renee just jumped in.
Oh, great.
We have good North Dakota connections now.
All right. Well, Romans 8, 28 through 30 as a framework for us reading the Joseph story and talking about Joseph. We know that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn within a large family. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. So, what do you know about Joseph, and what do you think about that, Lane? About like framing it with Romans, this idea of call and that God works together for good.
Yeah, Well, before I think about that framing of that Romans piece, which I love that. It's one of my
Yeah.
favorite New Testament
Yeah.
verses. I think of the camp song "We Know." I believe it was written by my friend Marsh Draghi up out of North Dakota.
Okay.
But yeah, I certainly believe that God can bring good out of a terrible situation.
Yeah.
And I think that's how, and so many people we wrestle with, why does God make bad things happen?
Right.
And my interpretation of that is it's not so much maybe that God is causing bad thing to happen, but that God is bringing good out of bad, which is why I wrestle when people say, all things happen for a reason.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I buy into that 100% as I do God taking this tragedy that we face in the world and bringing good out of it. But Joseph, as we go through the various texts, seems to say that God did this so that. God sold me into slavery so that.
So that. Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I think it's worth kind of diving into as we go along. Now, you asked me what I think about Joseph before we get too far flung. You can't help in our American culture in the last 40, 50 years hear of Joseph and not think about the Technicolor Dream Code or the Code of Many Colors from my Sunday school days.
Right.
All of that, which is probably not what the text intended, at least as you were probably discussing earlier today as I was reading your notes.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting, right? The NRSV, which is the translation that we use a lot in ELCA congregations,
which would be the New Revised Standard Version, which would be the modern update, albeit 25, 30 years ago now, from the RSV, the Revised Standard Version, which was pretty common with scholarly use for years.
Yeah. So this was a little bit of our conversation this morning that the NRSV translates that robe that Jacob gave Joseph is translated in the NRSV as a long robe with sleeves. So there is not mention of this many-colored robe. And so I was really curious about what is going on there about in the NRSV that it's always a robe with sleeves. And so when you look at the actual Hebrew word, it ends up being that word there is it's a robe with ornamentation, with some form of decoration or ornamentation. And it can mean multicolored, but it also can mean long sleeves.
Well, it's interesting too, and I'm probably shouting from across the room because I'm not finding what I was looking for.
Yeah, what are you looking for?
But there was a reference. Oh, it's right behind me. Packs of paper.
All right.
There was. Apologies. There was a reference in one of my Oxford annotated study Bibles, and as I decided to look at that a little bit more fully, is that the Hebrew for that talked about the meaning of either being like palms up or feet up. And so been a long robe that would cover you, but have room for your palms to be extended and your feet. So kind of a so
onesie?
Sleeves can kind of come through. Yeah, I suppose.
Like Jacob gave Joseph a onesie.
An ancient onesie.
Well, what is true is that it was distinctive.
Yes.
And it was so distinctive that his brothers could see him coming from a long ways off.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And they didn't get one.
They did not get one.
Which, as any parent of more than one kid can tell you, is a dangerous thing. When one kid gets something, the others don't.
Right. Yeah. And, I hadn't thought about it really until prepping for this conversation this morning and kind of reading again the Joseph story, which is long but is fascinating.
Almost 1/4 of the entire book of Genesis.
Yeah, right. That Jacob does in some ways, he kind of almost lives vicariously through Joseph. Jacob, this one who was the younger, who kind of usurped the birthright and kind of connived his way into the blessing as the younger, then sets Joseph up in a similar way by having Joseph the younger and raining on him all of his praise and giving him this distinctive coat and kind of
baby of the family, always gets everything.
Right, yeah. So but I'm kind of curious now, this is maybe a little bit of a personal question, but it seems as though Jacob is trying to relive his own childhood through Joseph. And
I've never thought of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just hadn't really considered the kind of parental kind of relationship in that way. And if that is what's happening, and maybe it is here in the scriptures, that seems to be a story that maybe almost any parent could identify with.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That desire to kind of live or relive one's life through, your
And
kids.
often that happens without any of us realizing that we are doing just that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I found it fascinating. Yeah. So yeah, you have some notes there. What were some of the things that struck you as you read?
There's
the
all
story?
kinds of stuff in this story,
Yeah.
and maybe a quick minute recap of the whole story would be helpful for people who haven't recently sat down and read the 13 chapters of the 14 chapters of the Joseph story.
Yeah.
Is we finally have this story of Abraham coming out and getting to Canaan, and then he goes down to Egypt for a while, then he comes back, then he has a bunch of kids, 12 of them. We get the 12 tribes of Egypt through them. He gets Isaac, and then Isaac has Jacob, or Jacob has the 12 kids. Then we get the 12 tribes. So anyway, so they're kind of traveling around, and we finally get to Jacob, and then he has these kids and Joseph, who we talked about.
Yeah.
Gets thrown in a hole by his brothers, who are upset because he has this new coat, which is a symbol of how much their father loves him more than them.
Yep.
And Reuben, not the sandwich, but the brother in the story, doesn't want him to die, and his brothers think he should die. So Reuben talks him into throwing him in a hole, thinking he's going to go get him back and save him later. But before he can do that, the brothers sell him to this caravan of salesmen making their way down to Egypt. So he gets taken out of there, then rushed down to Egypt. He goes into a prison eventually there because he's sold into the Roman guard, but he then solves a bunch of dreams for the Pharaoh, who then gets him out of there, and then he becomes a high official, and pretty soon he has control over all kinds of government affairs.
But it's no small thing. He's in prison for 2 years. So he gets down there and he has some kind of success in this household of this kind of military leader, but then runs afoul of the military leader's wife, and gets kind of framed for something.
Kind of a he said, she said scenario, but we tend to believe the he said side.
Well, that's certainly the narrative we're given that perspective, right? But then he's in prison for 2 years. And finally, word gets out that he can interpret dreams, and the Pharaoh calls him up because Pharaoh has a dream that none of the Pharaoh's advisors can give an explanation to, and Joseph does, and this interpretation is God breathed, and so the interpretation comes true, and he continues to rise up in esteem.
Yes.
Yeah. So then this interpretation has to do with 7 years of great harvests followed by 7 years of famine. And so Joseph says to the Pharaoh, store up your goods and your grain, because 7 years of plenty are going to be followed by 7 years of famine. And that then, the famine hits the whole of the Middle East, including Canaan, where his brothers and his father and his whole family are up there. So they haven't been storing up like they have been in Egypt. And so when word gets out, Egypt has food. And so the brothers come looking for food. And this is where, to me, it's really interesting. I think also, going back to that parental relationship, we know Jacob to be this conniving kind of, almost like a trickster character. And Joseph starts doing some of that. And you just wonder, like, how much of this is what he learned from his dad? Because he doesn't out himself as the brother to his, when they come down. And then he doesn't accept their money, but rather than he puts their money back in their bags and sends them away with food and the money. And they get real nervous that they're going to be seen as having stolen this money. And when they come back, he says, oh, no, I have the money. That must be something that God put in your bags. You know, and so there's just all of these layers where he's just kind of not telling the complete truth,
Mm-hmm.
and to me that just feels like he learned a thing or two from his dad about
Mm-hmm.
kind of manipulating things. And not, again, I mean, if we go back to that Romans text, God works for good, you know, but it's not necessarily all on the level.
Yeah, life isn't always clean.
Yeah.
You know, even in the best of intentions, where things work out in history, there's often that messiness just
Yeah.
kind of beneath the surface that doesn't always get the attention.
And well, that's what makes for a good story,
Yeah.
right? Because we can see ourselves in these people, and it just is a captivating story.
And then for us who have the rest of the story, not to quote Paul Harvey here, we know that there's this saving act by Joseph then bringing down his whole family into Egypt to save them from the famine and starvation. And it says that 70 people came, which is used probably as a number of completeness as opposed to an exact number of people. Probably more than that if it's, you know, all of these brothers and their families and all of that. So the wholeness of this family that started back with Abraham is now down in Egypt, saved from the famine. Well, we know that they go down to Egypt and things don't stay rosy for them. Eventually, Joseph goes out of the picture, and this group of people then go into slavery for 400 years, give or take, before Moses then comes on the scene to make happen one of the watershed moments in the history of the people of Israel, which is the Exodus, which is going from slavery into freedom, which then gets recast over and over, even into our own lives. That whole description of faith is going from slavery to freedom, from slavery in our sins to freedom in Christ. But it takes getting the whole clan of Abraham down, well, now Jacob, into Egypt, so that they can then be slaves to then be freed. So it all feeds into that rest of the story, which then creates the paradigms that we live into 5,000 years later in this story of forgiveness and grace, slavery to freedom.
And it's interesting to kind of think back. God, you know, makes these promises to Abraham even when Abraham and Sarah aren't having any children, and then God makes these promises to Jacob, even when Jacob is not the firstborn and really is in trouble his whole life. And God continues to reiterate this, and even when they're when that family is looks like they're at an end, then God makes a way. And in this kind of chapter of the story, that way is through Joseph being sold into slavery by his brothers and then put in a position where he can kind of bring that family down into a place where that promise will continue to be fulfilled. God's promise to make this family a blessing to all nations.
Yeah. Quick hello out there to Pastor Carrie Geyer up in Veblen, who has joined us. Again, congratulations on your ordination, number of weeks now, months ago. Also to Mary Jo, nice to have you with us tonight. Glad you are part of the conversation, as well as to Alice. Always fun to see your name pop up, Alice.
And Alice is a twofer on Tuesdays, because she comes in the morning and then joins us in the evening.
We should get her on camera that she could then retell the story.
So I'm really curious in our last 5 or so minutes here, Lane.
Yeah.
You brought up this because I'm in complete agreement with you. This idea that I like the Romans reading, but this idea that God has a plan, and so sometimes.
Well, I don't disagree with that.
Right, but that God plans catastrophe that then some good can come. And that's where I struggle with that interpretation too. So I wasn't reading the end of the Joseph story in that light. Sure. So I just want to now that you've put that framework in my head, I want to read the closing of the Joseph story,
Yeah.
just to see
'Cause-
if I see that, like you just brought it out. So
Because there are places throughout Scripture where that seems to be the intent.
Sure.
But it's sometimes framed in us not understanding God's ways
Sure.
more than catastrophe happening. But
Yeah.
that's neither here nor there.
no, I mean certainly that's true because we have a very limited view,
Yeah.
right?
So
So
it's
okay.
usually the way we want to see things.
True. All right, so let's maybe start at Genesis 50, starting at 15, maybe. So the brothers have come down, and they're living. The whole family is living down in Egypt in the land of Goshen, not Indiana, but I'm sure it's lovely too. And now Jacob has passed away. And they've taken this big royal processional back up to Cana to bury Jacob in that land. And this, we pick up chapter 50, verse 15. Realizing that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong that we did him?" So they approached Joseph, saying, "Your father gave this instruction before he died." He did not. Say to Joseph, "I beg you, forgive the crime of your brothers and the wrong they did in harming you. Now, therefore, please forgive the crime of the servants of the God of your father." Joseph wept when they spoke to him. When his brothers also wept, fell down before him and said, "We are here as your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people, as he is doing today. So have no fear, I myself will provide for you and for your little ones." In this way he reassured them, speaking kindly to them. All right, so let me just think about this idea that even though you intended it to do harm, I don't think I can read it that way, because it's the brothers intending harm, not God, right?
Yeah.
Would you agree? Okay. It's interesting. But even when someone intends harm, even against myself, yourself, that God can work through that. But I wouldn't say that God works through the person who is intending harm. Right? Like harm is part of the equation. It's just that, oh, harm happened. Okay, I can work with that. Just like God can work with Jacob.
Well, I don't know.
Disagree.
In the Old Testament here, we do have those moments where it seems to be the case. Because if you keep finishing that verse, Exodus 50, verse 20, even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people, as he is doing today.
Yeah.
So it seems from that at least peripheral reading that God somehow worked up some magnificent scenario to be able to get the entire clan of Jacob down into Egypt out of the famine and preserve them so that they could go in and then fulfill the promise to be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the grains of sand in the ocean. But I don't like that, thinking that this is somehow some big divine trickery scheme that takes up 14 chapters of Genesis just to get the people, 500 miles down the coast and into Egypt,
Now you got me thinking of a song. And I would walk 500 miles. Okay, sorry, people. But
the idea behind it is that God is still fulfilling God's promises.
Exactly.
And that this happens to be the way that the story comes about. And maybe you could read this. I mean, granted, this is English thousands of years later.
Right.
That God is somehow working even in the midst of these horrific circumstances to preserve a people, to keep the promise going. To say that no matter how bad things might get, it's not going to be big enough or bad enough to subvert what God had intended.
Sure. Yeah, and I think maybe that's it. That in the end, kind of hard times don't win out.
Yeah.
That the promise that God made to Abraham is good, and it will continue down through the generations, even to this day. this doing today. God is doing today, as Joseph says.
Which we can then pull into our own lives and our own difficulties that we face, that might seem like some divine drama we've been cast into the middle of, which I don't believe to be the case, but people can sometimes feel that way.
Well, I mean, the story's written that way, that we can see ourselves.
God will deliver us.
Yeah.
God will see us through the thing that's keeping us awake at night, the anxiety that we're experiencing, the trauma that we just went through, the job we lost, the spouse that left, the kid that got addicted, all of those things. Do not break the promises that God makes to us, and that God will work even in spite of those things to bring out good.
Amen. Preach it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that is that's why these stories are so captivating all of these thousands of years later, is that they still have a good news. And that is a term that wasn't present in at this time, that we apply that good news principle of Jesus even into this story of Joseph, and we can see it. It's
just this afternoon, I was sitting at this very table with a couple who's going to have their son baptized soon, and talking about the significance for me about that baptismal event, because in that event we get joined to the people of God. We're joined to the story, and that's then where our identity comes. That then, regardless of what obstacles or holes we might get thrown into in life, we are still God's people through that connection to Christ, which then unites us to generations of people who've walked in faith.
Yeah, good. Well, we've done it. We've gone another 30 minutes.
Oh, and plus a little over. And hi to Terry, who was a part of the conversation too. And thank you for being a part of this, Terry.
Yeah. Well, hey. Donna Moldenhauer in from Bottineau.
Awesome.
There it is. All right.
There we go. Awesome.
Well, shall we do our typical closing here?
Let us close in prayer. I give thanks to you, my heavenly Father, through Jesus Christ, your dear Son, that you have graciously protected me today. And I ask you to forgive me all my sins where I have done wrong, and graciously protect me tonight. For into your hands I commend myself, my body, my soul, and all that is mine. Let your holy angel be with me, so that the wicked foe may have no power over me. Amen. And a big shout out to everybody in Bottineau tonight. Thank you, Donna, for putting that up there. That's super, super helpful.
Yeah.
May you all rest well, have a good night, and stay warm regardless of where you are at.